them onto the computer, and I paint my backgrounds and textures and everything, and then once I've scanned them on, I use a program called Adobe Illustrator. Right? It's collage, essentially, and I cut everything out, so trace and cut everything out and sort of piece it together. The Métis culture, a mix of First Nations, mostly Cree and Ojibwe people, and European, mostly French and Scots people, has gone through many transformations since it began. In its own way, the Michif language, with its Red River and buffalo hunting roots, records the transformations of the Métis culture. I started with Ateoke, which means tell a story. It means tell a traditional story. That was the first letter of it. I tried to get a mix of both the French and Cree and English influenced words in the books.
I make it very hard for booksellers and for publishers too, to a certain extent, because of there's a lot of different strands. It's hard to say it's about this rather than that, or it's in this category rather than another. That's true. The bike close calls were early on when I realized quite quickly that I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. So all the bad stuff or potentially bad stuff happened in the first few days or a week or so, and after that it kind of settled down a bit. When you're on the bike, everything feels fine. You don't feel immortal. If you're 18 and riding a bike, perhaps you do, but you feel what can go wrong. Only afterwards do you realize the number of things that could have gone wrong.
A police officer, when you told him what your trip plans were, he said, "Don't do it. Like, you're crazy. What are you doing this for?"
Yeah, well, a lot of people said that. Actually, his first question was, "What do you carry?" And that was the first time I come across that question down there, and what he meant was, what kind of weapon are you carrying? And I was often asked that later on in the trip, and I had to say, I always said, well, I don't carry, I'm Canadian. The new border fence in the U.S. has put up about 700 miles along the 2,000-mile long border, and most people view it as an irritant or as being ineffectual. It's not going to keep people out. They'll find a way over it or around it. Obviously, if it's only 700 miles of a 2,000-mile long border, it's got ends, which people can go around, and they do, and it's only in sections anyway. So yeah, they object to it as a kind of, in a way, a kind of an obscene and ineffectual stopgap measure. There should be other ways of dealing with this problem. The poet Gloria Ansaldúa.
Yes.
But the border is a 1,900-mile-long stake piercing my heart, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, she really represents, or in the poem, and indeed in her own life, represents, that old Hispanic community, which was there for centuries, which the border, when it was imposed by the Americans, divided along the Rio Grande in southern Texas, along the valley of the Rio Grande. And that community still has a strong sense of that they're the same people on either side of the border, and an alien presence, an alien power. The gringos came along and cut them off from each other, and now even more so. That's why the fence is even more of an insult to those people. So, that's right, those are the two big problems, illegal migrants and drugs. And the drug war, since I was down there, I made my rides almost 4 years ago now, and it was pretty bad then, but it's become much, much worse since then. I wouldn't make the ride now that I made almost 4 years ago, because the war has intensified. It's spilled over the border much more into the U.S. from Mexico, spread down the coasts. So things are getting worse all the time.
It's kind of the same thing on the Canadian side. The paranoia of the U.S. On their borderlands, their lines there, and it's mostly to do probably with drugs in Canada as well, is it?
To a certain extent, drugs. We're
and terrorists, of course.
Yes, drugs they're used to. I mean, the Mexican border has those known quantities of illegal migrants who have been there forever, coming across forever, and drugs, the same thing. Drugs do come across our border. BC bud, of course, is a very prized commodity, and methamphetamines increasingly are supplied to the U.S. market from Canada rather than from the South. But they're mainly concerned with terrorists, that's right. And the fact that the border is open, they have the view that we're much more lax in security generally, and especially on the people we let into Canada who can then enter the U.S. easily. So that's their big concern, really. The Canadian border is twice as long, and I took the same amount of time to do it. I stopped much more in the south and talked to people much more in the south. In the north, because I had more distance to go, I spent more time just riding. So in the north, the weather was the problem, and I had a bit of a mishap early on and tore ligaments in one of my ankles, which was a real problem for the rest of the ride, so I had to deal with that. I mean, obviously, things are different in the on the northern border. There isn't the same level of security, and indeed, the problems are completely different and much more minor compared to the south.
Yeah.
But again, it's the American perception of, this terrorist danger in the north, which is a wrong perception, but it's still leading them to increasingly fortify the border.
I had never ever done a New Year's resolution in my life, so I thought, well, I could do one in terms of writing a book of poems. So I decided to write a book. It got complicated. I decided to write a book that would be 365 pages long, or sections. There's a section per page. But I also decided that it would be made up of 12 chapbooks, one for each month. Then I decided that each one of those chapbooks had to have a different constraint on it, on how it was to be composed. And then I decided that despite that fact, there had to be connections between all the different chapbooks that are really a lot different from each other in terms of form. Does that explain anything?
You actually have a theme for every chapbook.
Yeah.
And one of them was pants. And but that was really actually one of my favorites.
Well, on the first day of February, my
First day of
wife
February.
pulled my pants down in the kitchen, which she does from time to time. And I thought, I now know what the February poem is going to be. But then it had to be a structure that was made of, each poem had to be really skinny, small, and have 2 stanzas made out of 1 sentence or 3 sentences. I can't
Right.
remember exactly how that one worked. Joe Brainard, who was an artist friend of a lot of poets who became really, really good poets and when they all moved to New York. And he started the I Remember book. And all you do is you get up you have a subject, somebody or some subject, some person, some part of your life, and every morning you start off with, I remember, blah, 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 whatever you remember that day. And this is the second one I've written. The first one I wrote about Greg Kernel, the painter. And this one is about my parents.
Yeah.
And so it's 31 things I remember about my parents from when I was a kid. There's a lot of Okanagan in this book.
There's a lot,
There's
yeah.
one poem called Valley, which is all done in handwriting, because it's a reply to a poem by Lorene Niedecker, which is all done in handwriting, about her place, which was a very, very wet place in Wisconsin. I grew up in a very, very dry place here, so I reply to her poem with this one,
With the
and it's
valley.
and so you get my handwriting. My favorite number is 27, which is 3 times 9.
Right.
So this poem has, it's an remember the Elizabethan poets like Shakespeare used to enumerate the parts of the lady's person, say your lips are like blah, and your cheeks and your breasts and all that stuff, right? Even in the Bible it does this. So that's what I did. I enumerated my sweetheart's parts and in the poem, and it's made up of lines that step down. It goes 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 in terms of words. I've read it a few times at readings when Jean was around, and she didn't mind that all that much.
Yeah, it gets a little personal.
Yeah, it does,
Some
kind of,
areas,
yeah.
Yeah.
But luckily, there are no staples in this book. So one of these books is about my third go at that, of taking famous questions in literature and answering them. Right? So they got T.S. Eliot and Yeats and all kinds of big people in there, and just like let them have it. Right?
Yeah, that
Straighten them out.
was great too. I really enjoyed that. That
There's
was
a
lot of
million.
fun.
See, the point is,
Yeah.
that's a textbook, and it means there's a million ways to write a poem that don't have to be about your own feelings. Would you say that for the rest of your life, you could, if you just had to buy one book of poems to last the rest of your life?
I think it would
this
be My Darling Nellie
Yeah.
Grant.
Okay.
A completely
question
unsolicited
about it.
testimony.
Yeah. Well.
Absolutely.